Welcome everybody, Ravenar here, and if you're watching this video, that means you are new to Heroes of the Storm. And my goal here is to give you 5 tips that I wish I would have known when I started playing. And on that note, if you haven't already, make sure you do check out my stream. I'm going to post a link to that down below in the description. So without any further ado, let's hop in. And tip number 1 is going to be your minimap. And this is going to be a really valuable tool located right about here. And what it does is give you a bunch of valuable information on the map. It's going to tell you things like where your enemies are, where the next objectives are, and where the camps are. And you want to be utilizing all of these to your advantage. I always say you want to be looking at your minimap every about 5 to 8 seconds. I like to draw a comparison to looking at your mirrors while you're driving. And the reason this is so important is because you want to know where your enemies are at all times. And if you can't see them on the map, you need to assume that they are coming to kill you. And that's going to lead into my second tip, which is going to be vision. So several maps are going to have different forms of vision that you can get, whether it's vision points or vision camps that you can kill. And several characters are going to have forms of vision as well. You're going to have Creep from Zagara. Chromie has a talent that gives vision. So there's going to be a lot of different ways to utilize vision to your advantage. And the reason for that is because the less your opponent knows about you and your location, the better. And if you ever don't see them for your own safety, you need to be assuming that they are coming to gank you. And on the other side of that, you want to make sure that you're also not giving your enemies any information that they don't need. So if you're rotating in between lanes, you want to make sure you are not showing on the minimap if you don't have to. All right, tip number 3 is going to be learning different heroes. Now, in Heroes of the Storm, there's going to be quite a few heroes in quite a few different roles. And unless you're experienced with MOBAs, this might be a little bit overwhelming. Now, the guideline I like to say is you want to try to learn 2 to 3 heroes in every single role, just so you have a decent hero pool to go off of, and then figure out what you like to play from there and specialize in that. But it is very important that you know how to play multiple roles. And we're going to start with a couple of the more straightforward ones, starting with your tank. Now, your tank is pretty self-explanatory. They stand in your front line, they soak up as much damage as they can, but the thing you need to keep in mind with your tank is that your primary goal is to protect your back line first and try to set up kills second. And that is going to be something that you need to learn that middle ground, and you're just going to learn that through experience. But protecting your team, protecting your backline should always be your number 1 priority. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be your healers. As a healer, that's pretty self-explanatory. Your job is to keep your teammates alive with your heals and with your utility. Now, something to keep in mind is a lot of your utility can be used to set up kills as well, and that's totally fine. But you always want to make sure that you are thinking about your teammates when you're utilizing your utility as well. Now, the next role we're going to talk about is going to be your Bruiser. Your Bruiser is going to act both as your solo laner and as your secondary frontline as well. Now, the first thing to talk about here is what lane is the solo lane? This is a topic that is going to be very important for new players to know, and even some more experienced players as well, as your solo laner being in their solo lane is going to be very important for the match. And it is decided with a couple factors. Your solo lane is generally going to be the furthest lane away from the other 2 lanes on 3-lane maps, and if all of the lanes are evenly spaced apart, it has pretty much been understood that the solo lane defaults to top lane. So those are some very important things to keep in mind. Now, the next thing is going to be, what is my role as a Bruiser? Now, a Bruiser is going to be a relatively tanky frontline with not necessarily as much health as a tank, but what you give up with health, you make up for with more damage. So your role is going to be to obviously cover that solo lane, but also to empower your team as being that secondary frontline for your tank and to be a threat to the enemy team as well. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about here is going to be your damage. And your damage is going to be broken up into ranged and melee, and furthermore into burst and sustain. And it's going to be very important that you have a variety in your team comp. Let's start with our burst, which are primarily going to be our mages. These are going to be your ability-based damage dealers that are a little bit on the squishy side, but they're going to be your primary form of wave clear. So it is very important that you always have one of these on your team. Now the second one is going to be your sustained damage dealers. And these are going to be your forms of more consistent damage, which is usually achieved by either auto attackers or forms of bleed or poison damage. A special note I do want to make here is that in game, the roles are split up into ranged assassin and melee assassin. Ranged assassin will be the role that has your burst damage and some of your sustained damage in it, but the melee assassin role is primarily for your sustained damage dealers. The last thing I want to touch on is going to be the support role. And these are going to be roles that are a little bit more difficult to play, and they kind of trickle into the other roles that we already discussed, and I would not recommend picking them up as a new player. Tip number 4 is going to seem a little silly at first, but it's going to be learn to play as a team. And the reason this is so important is because HOTS is a very team-based game. And unlike other MOBAs out there, it is very unlikely you're going to be able to carry a game by yourself. So you need to learn how to rely on your teammates and do everything you can to empower your teammates as well. And there's several things that you can do to help with that. And one of those is going to be if you're playing in a draft format, you want to make sure that you are giving your team an adequate team comp, which means you want to go with 1 tank, 1 healer, a bruiser, and 2 forms of damage dealers. And you want to make sure that these damage dealers, at least one of them, if not both, have a form of wave clear, because that's going to be very important going forward into the map. Now, once you get into a game, there's several different factors that you and your team want to be doing. We talked about this before, but vision. You want to make sure that you are utilizing vision to your greatest advantage, because the less your opponent knows and the more you know, the better. And another thing you want to keep in mind is when you're team fighting, you want to make sure you're not going in with a numbers disadvantage. So if there's 4 members of the enemy team, if there's 3 of you or less, you want to be disengaging from the team fight instead of engaging. You never want to be fighting down 3v4. And the next thing you want to look at are going to be your talent tier advantages. There's going to be several different talent tiers where you get additional abilities or empowerments on your abilities throughout the game. You want to make sure that if your opponent has one of those talent tier advantages and your team does not, that you try to disengage from the fight and not engage in a fight down a talent tier. And on the flip side of that, if you guys have a talent tier advantage, you want to be looking for a team fight with the advantage because you want to be taking every advantage that you can. Now, obviously, there are going to be some exceptions to these rules. There are going to be instances where it is okay to fight down talent tiers or down players, but a basic rule of thumb, especially as a new player, is you never want to do that. And tip number 5 is going to be learn the different maps. So Heroes of the Storm is going to have a wide array of different maps, 15 plus maps and 12 maps in the ranked rotation. Each one of these maps is going to have a unique objective that comes along with it. You want to make sure you take your time and learn how each of these maps operate so you can be most optimal on it. And I know it might seem a little bit overwhelming at first to try to learn so many maps. Take it one map at a time. As you get introduced to the game as a new player, it will only let you play on a limited number of maps. So it eases you into each map so you are able to learn it at a slower pace. And on a different note, I actually released a series of map guides that go over tips and tricks about every single map in the ranked rotation. I'm going to go ahead and post a link to that down below in the description, but also I'll put a link up here as well. So make sure you guys do check them out if you want a couple extra tips and tricks about how to play each map in the ranked rotation. All right, that's going to be it for my 5 tips for new players. Now, if you did like this video, make sure you let me know in the comments, but also make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification button as well. Make sure you check out my other videos on the channel. But also, special note, make sure you do check out my Twitch stream. I'm going to post a link to that down below in the description. But most importantly, have a good night, everybody. Oh, we did it, team. Oh my god, I'm dead. I'm dead, though.
Killing spree.
Oh my god, I did it!